Thank you very much, Lasky and Corla, and I welcome the opportunity of making a contribution to what is, in my opinion, a very important debate that we're having in this House tonight and indeed tomorrow night. And that is why Fianna Fáil decided to dedicate this private member's time to the issue of lending and to the need for the establishment of an SME-focused new enterprise bank that would be owned by the state. And I think the starting point really in this debate is to acknowledge that we have a real problem. Because if we don't acknowledge that there is a problem with the availability of credit in the economy, then we're not going to solve that particular problem. And access to credit is to an economy what fuel is to a car. You're not going to have an economy that is functioning properly unless you have an adequate supply of credit. And we can debate it all night tonight. But the reality is, if you go and speak with people who are in business, who are relying on credit from our financial institutions, you will get one pretty clear, consistent message from them, that credit conditions remain extremely difficult. And any business person that I speak to, and I always ask them what are the main challenges that you're facing, credit will always be in the top three. The other two will generally be compliance and red tape issues and the cost of doing business, whether it be local authority rates, energy costs and so forth. But pretty much without exception, the issue of credit and finance will be right up there as a key issue for existing businesses in Ireland. And it is particularly an issue for the SME community, and Deputy Cleary has outlined through the various statistics that are there the importance of SMEs for the Irish economy, and the fact that I think we all acknowledge that SMEs will be the driver of the economic recovery in Ireland. We all love to hear of multinationals coming into Ireland, and we'd love to see a lot more of them, but it's pretty rare now that you hear of a multinational coming in announcing 700 or 800 jobs and the various spin-off jobs that flow from that. And the idea will have to continue to work on that side of the economy, and the very best of luck to them. But I think we have a particular onus here to focus on the issue of SMEs, and particularly on the issue of credit. The reality is, Minister, that while the government talks about the lending targets, and the banks, the two pillar banks in particular, have to meet lending targets of €4 billion each in 2013, and they come out and say we are going to achieve our targets, and the Credit Review Office examines that and says yes, the banks are on course to meet those targets. But Deputy Cleary is right. In many ways it's a phony debate, because at least 2/3 of the makeup of the €4 billion each is going to be refinancing and rolling over existing credit. Now, there is nothing wrong with refinancing existing credit or rolling over loans. That is credit, and that is an important part of the economy, but it isn't new credit, and we shouldn't be measuring it as such. And when you look at the last report from the Credit Review Office, they make it very clear that in many respects the €8 billion target between AIB and Bank of Ireland is a false one, because there's nobody suggesting that the economy needs anywhere near new lending of €8 billion to the SME sector. John Trethone in his report goes on to point out that it has been argued if new lending of €8 billion per annum were to be achieved in Ireland, it would require a lending borrowing rate of approximately twice that of the EU's most successful economy, Germany, on a like-for-like scale basis. So let's have a real debate. Let's set targets for new lending, not approvals, but the drawdown of new credit in the economy. We're having this debate now being kicked around for the last 2 or 3 years. The banks have targets, they're meeting the targets. Some of it is repackaging existing credit, and a small element of it is new credit. Can we not for once and for all agree on the definition of what a lending target is, and ensure that the banks are independently assessed, perhaps by the CRO, to ensure that those targets are being achieved? I think that is critically important. It is certainly the case that SMEs are cautious in many cases about taking on new debt, and a lot of the loan offers that are made are not being drawn down, and I think that is for a number of reasons. Yes, SMEs have got burned in the past through property investments, many of which have contaminated good trading businesses. But also nowadays, when approvals are given after in many cases a long period of time, they come with such onerous terms and conditions and punitive interest rates that it is simply not viable or sustainable for the business to draw down that credit. And in many cases, they are also coming with a demand for personal guarantees, which a lot of people are not prepared to give for very obvious reasons, because they have seen the consequences for those who made personal guarantees in recent years in respect of property investments. There is a distinct lack of competition, Minister, in the banking sector in Ireland. We have to accept that point, and Deputy Cleary has outlined a number of the banks that have left Ireland so far and those that have now signalled that they are about to leave, including ACC, which is going to actually hand back its banking licence. Now, there are some positives with the expansion of KBC. Investec is a very welcome new entrant into Ireland, relatively new in recent years, and they have indicated that they are going to enter the mortgage market, and we need certainly badly needed competition in that sector. But Ireland must be primed now for new entrants to come into the banking sector, entrants with clean balance sheets, entrants who are not burdened with having a historical level of tracker mortgages, which are dragging down a number of the domestic banks, for example, and new entrants who can come in not having been burned by the whole experiment with property in this country. So, if the banks that are operating internationally share the government's confidence in the future of the Irish economy, then I would expect to see more of them want to enter the Irish market, want to offer personal customers and SMEs products and services. And I would hope that the government is actively trying to attract banks into Ireland who are not burdened down by legacy tracker issues or legacy property-related loan issues, because I think that is very important. In relation to the pillar banks, I've spoken about the targets that they are facing, and one of the frustrations that I think a lot of business people find nowadays is that the discretion that historically existed in the local branch, talking to the bank manager, building up a personal relationship with a manager who would know the business intimately, the manager nowadays doesn't seem to have any power at all, as far as I can see. Virtually any significant lending decision that is being made by a bank is not made now at the branch level. It's passed up to head office, where it goes through, a risk assessment process, and a decision is eventually made. But I think that's one of the weaknesses now of the way that the banking system has developed, that power and that discretion that was always there at the local level, where the people involved in making the decisions knew the businesses well, knew the people running those businesses, where trust had been established and a relationship had been built up, that now seems to have been demolished because of, again, the experience that has happened in recent times. And I know that it is very frustrating for business people who are seeking loans. And, there has often been commentary about why the number of cases going to the credit review office is so low. Well, I would argue, Minister, it is because a business person can only go to the CRO after they have exhausted all of the internal channels within the bank. They have to first of all make a formal loan application, which takes time, is onerous. They have to receive a decision on that, and then they have to exhaust the internal appeals procedures within the banks. And it is only when their appeal has been refused that they can then go to the credit review office. But in so many instances, the request for credit is quite an urgent one. And the people in business simply cannot wait for that entire process to have been concluded before they take a case to the CRO. I think that is an issue that the government should look at. Surely it would be sufficient that if the bank refuses the application, that the person can go directly to CRO. Now, I welcome the fact that in the recent budget that the government did increase the threshold limit for loans that can be considered by the CRO to €3 million. And I think that's a very important step, and hopefully we will see more work going to the CRO. I also think that the government has to ensure that Ulster Bank is brought under the remit of the Credit Review Office. Basically, at the moment, it's AIB and Bank of Ireland, and people who have commercial loans with permanent TSB and they did experiment in that market do not have the right now to go to the Credit Review Office. and I believe that that is an issue that needs to be addressed as well. There are consequences, Minister, for the significant reduction in competition in the Irish banking sector. And those are consequences for customers by way of increased fees and charges. They are consequences by way of reduced interest rates on deposits and higher rates of interest on loans that are being provided both to personal customers and to SMEs. So we need to have, two fundamental aspects to our approach to banking. Yes, regulation, which was so deficient in the past, and we all acknowledge that. But the second and equally important pillar is the issue of competition. And I think a lot more work has to be done by government in that respect. And allied to that, the central bank has to do a far greater amount of work on the issue of protecting consumers in relation to their role as a regulator. They're not just there to prudentially supervise the banking system and ensure that the checklist of regulations are being ticked. They are also there to protect consumers, and I want to see them be more prominent in respect of that particular role. We alluded in our motion, Minister, to the issue of money lending, and I acknowledge that licensed money lenders are operating a legitimate business. They are regulated by the central bank, but the recent report showed a 20% increase over the last number of years in the number of people who are availing of the services of money lenders. About 360,000 people now owe collectively about €200 million. And the study also found that about a quarter of them have at one stage got into serious difficulty in terms of repaying those loans. Now, that tells me one thing, not just about the state of the economy, which we're all acutely aware of, but it tells me the fact that so many additional people have had to turn to money lenders, that the traditional providers of credit in the Irish economy, the banks and the credit unions who are in the news at the moment, have not been able to supply the credit that people need at this time. Now, there undoubtedly are people who should not get any more credit. There are people who would like to draw down loans that they can never afford to repay based on their level of income, and banks have to be prudent and they have to protect the capital the taxpayers have given to them. But there is undoubtedly an issue there in terms of the contraction, Minister, of lending. We want to see, above all else, a new enterprise bank which is focused on SMEs. And your own counter-motion acknowledges that the government did promise a strategic investment bank to provide finance for large capital projects, a conduit for venture capital and a lender to SMEs. And as a precursor to that, you have established this strategic investment fund, though we have yet to see the legislation to provide for the reorientation of the National Pension Reserve Fund to channel some money towards the strategic investment fund. But I honestly believe that of far greater priority for the economy at this point in time is the issue of SME lending. If we can agree on one thing in this House, it should be that the engine of recovery will be SMEs. They are certainly starved of cash, and many of them are finding it exceptionally difficult to get credit, and that issue is going to have to be addressed. What seems to have happened, Minister, is that the banks have swung from one extreme to the other. 7 or 8 years ago, they were throwing money at people. They seemed to have no concept of risk assessment. They took reckless risks in terms of putting all their eggs into the property basket, and we have all witnessed where that has led the banking system and where that has led the country. But they now appear to have gone to the other extreme completely, and the banks are so risk averse. They are so unwilling to take any chance, as far as I can see, in respect of trading businesses, and even businesses with whom they have built up a strong relationship over a number of years. And very often, it is the issue of an overdraft. Banks have been restricting overdrafts consistently over the last couple of years. And I acknowledge that the Troika programme contains very strict targets for the banks to meet in terms of repairing their balance sheets. Rebuilding their loan-to-deposit ratios, deleveraging of non-core assets. But all of that has percolated its way down to the individual SME customer. It has meant that the banks are less inclined to give out more credit have been aggressively targeting deposits in an effort to rebuild those ratios, and that's what they're doing. And there seems to be no reward or incentive for them to give out new credit. And Minister, if you don't believe what we are saying, then listen to those who are at the coalface. And Deputy Cleary referred to ISME, and one quote that he gave in the recent quarterly report that they issued in relation to lending. He said, despite assertions from the banking PR machine, access to credit is abysmal. The application process is getting more tortuous, while zealous bankers terrorise owners of small and medium businesses with legal letters of foreclosure rather than negotiate an economic settlement.
Thank you.
Now, you can accuse Mr Fielding of exaggeration, but he's representing thousands of business people, and I have heard none of them contradict what he has been saying consistently in relation to credit. So, Minister, I know you're not going to accept our motion, but I do hope you will accept the need for a new SME-focused enterprise bank, and that the government will start doing some detailed work on that issue to see how it can be established, what the mechanics are, and to accept that it can play a very important role in the recovery of the Irish economy.